And welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this the exciting update today here on Australian Indian Radio and the Gentex Multimedia Group. And today, first of all, let's join in with the Queensland Parliament House, and later on we will resume with our normal proceedings.
Used to embed greater levels of trust, transparency and engagement. The report made 32 recommendations
Honourable
to improve
Selim
the way the public trustee engages with customers. The majority of the recommendations in the report are for the public trustee to consider and implement. The public trustee has taken action to address the recommendations from the report, and the largest reform project in the history of the public trustee has commenced with the independent review of fees and charges. The work is supported by policy and practice changes across the organisation to ensure immediate action is taken to support vulnerable Queenslanders. I am pleased to report to the House the public trustee advises he has already implemented many of the recommendations made through the report and continues to work to implement remaining relevant recommendations. Government has responsibility for 10 recommendations and has already implemented one through the introduction of the Public Trustee Advisory and Monitoring Amendment Bill 2021. Work on the remaining recommendations is underway, including consultation with key stakeholders to ensure the best outcome for vulnerable Queenslanders. Speaker, I table a progress update from the Public Trustee on the implementation of the recommendations in the Public Advocate's report.
I call the Minister for the Environment and the Great Barrier Reef and Minister for Science and Youth Affairs.
Thank you, Speaker. It's an incredible privilege to rise to update the House on the Palaszczuk Government's latest addition to our protected area estate. As the Premier has just announced, the Government has recently acquired Bramwell Station and Richardson Station in Cape York. These two properties are the gateway to northern Cape York and the northernmost point of Australia, Bajinka, also known as the Tip. And, Mr Speaker, as you acknowledge at the beginning of every day in this place, we are all fortunate to live in a country which is home to two of the oldest continuing cultures. But we have an ugly and uncomfortable shared history in this country, and it's something we need to tell the truth about. And, as this government, we have a responsibility to do all we can to restore some of the wrongs of the past. One of the most important ways we can do that is through land justice. This morning I spoke to Gerhard Pearson, who I want to acknowledge will be here today, along with Richie Ahmet. Gerhard was at the first meeting of traditional owners who met in Cape York in 1989 to talk about what would eventually become the program of handbacks, which was commenced by the then Goss government. We talked about the painful history of people being forcibly removed from their land around the tip of Cape York. Back then, they didn't believe they would get back walking, living or breathing on country. They never thought their grandchildren's footprints would return. The traditional owners of this land have waited. They've waited for more than 30 years, for generations before that, to have their land back. The Goss government embarked on a program of land handbacks, and it's something that we are proud to continue. The Beattie government enacted groundbreaking legislation to bring about formal ownership and joint management of Cape York Peninsula National Parks. And it's been an important partnership forged between successive Labor governments and First Nations people over many years. The next step is for the Queensland Government and the traditional owners to work together to determine the most appropriate allocation of land for National Park and for Aboriginal land and cultural heritage management. This acquisition forms part of the Palaszczuk Government's protected area strategy, with more than 14 million hectares across Queensland now protected in some way. We've also recently acquired the Lakes, a 35,000 hectare property north of Hughenden, which we announced last month. These purchases were highly strategic and carefully negotiated. For the purchase of these three properties, we owe an enormous debt of gratitude to the Nature Conservancy of Australia that brokered contributions from charitable foundations, including the Weiss Foundation. Also part of this strategy is the $24 million we announced for the appointment of 54 First Nations rangers for 13 communities across Queensland, with more positions to come. And I want to acknowledge the former Environment Minister, the Honourable Leanne Enoch, for announcing those rangers. With their knowledge and connection to land and sea, these Indigenous rangers play a vital role in their communities and in looking after national parks and protected areas. We are grateful for their knowledge they share. Mr Speaker, I know that this is a significant announcement that many people have been working on for many, many years, and I want to acknowledge those people and the next generations who will now be able to leave their footprints on this land.
Call the Minister for Health and Ambulance Services.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, I'd like to start this morning by offering my deepest condolences to the family of Tammy Dixon Fruin, an Australia Day Citizen of the Year nominee and a much-loved mother, wife, friend and co-worker to her Queensland Health colleagues. Tammy was a cherished member of the Mackay Hospital and Health Service family. In her role as home and community care worker, Tammy regularly transported clients to medical appointments in Emerald and Mackay. She developed close bonds with the clients during these trips and could often be seen sharing a laugh and a friendly chat with her colleagues. From all reports, Tammy's positive and infectious personality and her genuine care for others endeared her to clients, colleagues and the broader community. Tragically, Tammy lost her life in a car crash while transporting a patient on the Peak Downs Highway. Tammy's approach embodied all that is best and about the health system, respect and compassion for people under her care. Tammy understood that the delivery of the best possible care mattered and that it has a profound impact on communities. Days after the tragic incident, my Director General, Chief Operating Officer and I visited Clermont to meet with Tammy's colleagues, friends and family. I know the gravity of her loss has been felt deeply and profoundly by the Clermont community, including her husband and 3 sons. While this is a difficult and painful time, I hope they take comfort from knowing how loved and respected she was for the incredible contribution she made in helping others in need. Mr Speaker, I'd also like to express my condolences to the family of Gold Coast University Hospital Dr Lukman Joubert, who tragically lost his life in a drowning accident this month. Dr Joubert lost his life in the rescue of a struggling swimmer and tragically was himself dragged out to sea. Dr Joubert's bravery in this emergency is reflective of his compassion in his work as a medical researcher and doctor. He dedicated his life to helping others. Dr Joubert was originally from Iraq. Upon arriving to Australia, he re-qualified as a doctor and served our community through his profession. Dr Joubert has worked in the COVID-19 wards in Westmoreton and most recently at the Gold Coast University Hospital. Dr Joubert was committed to serving the community and travelled to both New South Wales and Victoria to assist in their COVID response. He was involved in conducting world-first research using a gene-editing technology to cure cervical cancer. This was hailed as a breakthrough in cancer research when it was published internationally in 2019. I am told that at the time of his passing, Dr Joubert was finalising his training in oncology. Today is Dr Joubert's funeral. I am sure I speak for everyone in this House when I say I extend our sympathies and condolences to his loved ones, failed Tammy Dixon Fruin and Dr Lukman Joubert.
I call the Minister for Regional Development and Manufacturing and Minister for Water.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. South East Queensland has woken today to another wet morning and significant rainfall is predicted for the coming days. Of course, our thoughts are with the people who have been affected and the communities who have been inundated, but when the clouds part, there certainly will be a silver lining to this rain. This rain has given the South East Queensland water catchments a massive boost. As of this morning, South East Queensland water grid is sitting at 71%. That's a 10% increase since the start of summer, putting the water grid more than 15% higher than it was this time last year. Mr Speaker, I can't make the rain fall as much as I'd like, but the South East Queensland water grid, built by a forward-thinking Queensland Labor government, means we can make the most of these precious drops. It's one of the largest urban water grids in Australia, servicing around 70% of the state's population. Mr Speaker, Queensland's water resources are vital for our economic, social, environmental, cultural well-being to drive economic growth and job opportunities for those Queenslanders. Our largest water storage, Wivenhoe Dam, is above 57%, as I said, and our second largest water storage, Somerset Dam, which flows into Wivenhoe, is just under 80%, so this is good news. Operational releases from Somerset Dam happened overnight, and Seqwater is managing the grid to best preserve all of the water by moving water into central areas including Brisbane, Ipswich and Logan. We've got a number of dams filling right across the region, and I encourage Queenslanders to stay up to date with the Seqwater app. I know we're the Sunshine State, but a bit of rain certainly does a lot of good in these times. This is great news, but it doesn't mean we're in relaxation mode here in Queensland, Mr Speaker. With more heavy rainfall predicted over the coming days, Seqwater is continuing to monitor inflows right across all of our dams. With continued heavy rainfall forecasts, we are reminding people that if it's flooded, forget it, and to stay away from fast-moving water.
I call the Minister for Communities and Housing, Minister for the Digital Economy and Minister for the Arts.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, the arts and cultural sector has been amongst the hardest hit by the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, and this has been especially so for the live music industry. To date, the Palaszczuk government has committed to more than $79 million worth of initiatives to support the arts and cultural sector through the impacts of COVID-19. This includes a $22.5 million arts and cultural recovery package and a further $7 million in the 2021-22 budget to support the live music industry. Queensland's live music sector remains one of the most significantly impacted by the pandemic, which is presenting unprecedented challenges to the sustainability of venues and the careers of artists, arts workers and suppliers who rely upon the industry for employment. Palaszczuk government's live music support program has provided around $2.8 million in further financial support to many of Queensland's dedicated indoor live music venues. This includes support for small to medium-sized venues, including $180,000 to Soul Bar in Maroochydore, $100,000 to the Brisbane Jazz Club in Kangaroo Point, and more than $30,000 to the Junk Bar in Ashgrove, and larger venues such as $380,000 to the Fortitude Music Hall. Our latest support for venues through round 3 of the Live Music Support Program brings the Palaszczuk government's total support for live music to $13.7 million since the onset of COVID-19 impacts in March 2020. This includes direct financial assistance to 37 venues statewide. And, Mr Speaker, Queensland's dedicated live music venues have been very clear that the Palaszczuk government's programs have been a vital lifeline for this important part of the live music ecology. One venue operator on the Sunshine Coast recently wrote, "Over the last year we have only been able to keep our doors open due to the generous state government support." And Paul Day, president of the Brisbane Jazz Club, said, it is so important for entertainment to survive in these difficult times, and it will now at the Brisbane Jazz Club, along with keeping its staff employed thanks to the Live Music Support Program and the Queensland Government. Mr Speaker, the arts, cultural and creative sectors are key to delivering our plan for economic recovery, each year contributing $8.5 billion into the state's economy and supporting more than 92,000 jobs. The Palaszczuk government will continue to consult with the live music sector and the wider arts and cultural industries to understand and respond to ongoing and emerging impacts of COVID-19.
I call the Minister for Resources.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And Mr Speaker, there cannot be a prosperous resource industry without its workers. Their health is a priority of paramount importance to the Palaszczuk government. And that's why I was so excited to launch the Heart5 Mobile Health Unit as it hit the road for regional Queensland. This mobile health unit was developed in partnership between the Palaszczuk government, Resources Safety and Health Queensland and the Heart of Australia. It provides a range of health monitoring services to Queensland's regional mine and quarry workers, vital in early detection of mine dust lung disease. Heart5 is a one-of-a-kind. Its groundbreaking engineering, design and construction has drawn on expertise from right around the world. Importantly, it was built right here in Queensland, in Narangba, another example of this state's amazing manufacturing capabilities, creating and supporting jobs as part of the Palaszczuk government's economic recovery plan as we emerge from the Omicron wave. Mr Speaker, Queensland's mobile health unit is a world first. It includes a high-resolution, battery-operated CT scanner, and I'm not talking about AA batteries here, but it's designed to work anywhere and everywhere, every time. Heart5 is outfitted with other equipment vital in protecting the health of our current and former mine and quarry workers. An onboard chest X-ray complete with lung function testing and general assessment services as well. With Heart5, the mobile heart health unit recommendations made by the Parliamentary Committee inquiry, and I know a number of members on both sides of the House were involved with that, into the re-identification of coal miners' pneumoconiosis have been delivered. I'd like to thank Dr Rolf Gomes and his team at Heart of Australia, RSHQ, Mining and Energy District President Stephen Smythe, the former member for Morenni, Jimmy Pearce, and the Mine Dust Lung Disease Victims Advocacy Group, whose voices have been instrumental through this process. And Mr Speaker, I'd also like to...
Member for Southern Downs. Minister, you have the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, I'd also like to give a shout-out to former Minister Dr Anthony Lynham for his work. He did a lot of work. I just picked up the keys and started the engine. Following Heart 5's launch in Brisbane, I joined the team on the road in Collinsville, where free lung checks were offered to more than 70 retired workers. I'm advised that on its first week of official operations, Heart 5 has already detected abnormalities in some lung screens. Those patients will now be referred for treatment. Vital early detection could save their lives. Heart of Australia is working with local medical providers regarding ongoing treatment. In the past, the tyranny of distance may have delayed patients' access to these highly specialised screenings. And, Mr Speaker, as you know, blokes aren't good at going to the doctor. Well, this is about the doctor going to them. Now the help, as I said, will go to them. After Collinsville, I joined the Assistant Minister for Health in Mackay, where we met with local industry stakeholders at the Heart 5 Open Day to speak about how fantastic this investment is already doing in regional Queensland. People travel from throughout central Queensland to see this important facility, which shows just how important it is for our resource workers and those former resource workers after they've hung up their high-vis and hard hats. Heart 5 demonstrates our commitment to the prevention and early detection of mine dust lung diseases, ensuring better health outcomes for our Queensland workers.
Is there any other government business? I call the Leader of the House.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, I seek leave to move a motion without notice.
Is leave granted? Leave is granted.
Mr Speaker, I move that the Legal Affairs and Safety Committee inquire into and report to the Legislative Assembly by 31 August 2022 on 1. Issues relating to access to donor conception information, including A. Rights of donor-conceived persons, including to know their genetic origins. B. Extent to which identifying information about donors should be given to donor-conceived persons, taking into consideration the right to privacy of donors. C. Access to historical clinical records.
So, ladies and gentlemen, that's the proceedings from the Queensland Parliament House this morning. We'll leave the proceedings there. We can join that later on, and we will try and incorporate that in our new segments from tomorrow after we find out all the sitting dates, and especially the beginning session when the Premier's there. It would probably be important. But right now, as you have mentioned from the ministers there, about the wet weather. So let's take a look at what's happening and what can we expect within the next 24 hours.
Thank you to both of you for coming on, because a lot of people are watching the radars and seeing the waters rise and wondering what is next. Mark, I might start with you there in Brisbane. Tell us, how did everyone get on overnight?
Yeah, we had a little bit of a reprieve overnight with the weather staying offshore, but we know that it is expected to come back in today. We're saying to people, don't be complacent, because we know the weather's coming through. We have a severe weather warning from Maryborough down to Coolangatta and out to Dalby and Stanthorpe. Our crews, our SES crews volunteers, have conducted about 240 tasks since 5 o'clock yesterday morning, and our Swiftwater Rescue crews have conducted about 19 rescues and water rescues. So they have been busy, and we expect that they will be today. So we say to people, don't be complacent. Also understand that the roads that you normally drive on could be flooded, and we're saying if it's flooded, forget it. Now, that message is not only for the drivers of the vehicles, but also to passengers, to understand that they need to be aware as well. Be aware that some of those roads could be treacherous, and we want to make sure that we've got our crews in place, but it's also the responsibility of the homeowner and the local people, especially in southeast Queensland, to be aware of the conditions and the potential rain to come.
Yeah, and Mark, can you tell us any circumstances around the sad news received about the death of a woman?
Yeah, it has been tragic, and that'll now be in the hands of the Queensland Police Service and the coroner. We provided support through that incident, and we actually don't want to respond to incidents like that. We've been to a number of incidents where we've checked cars that are underwater and there's been no people in there, and we're just saying to people, if it's flooded, forget it, stay out of the floodwaters.
Of the Queensland Government.
I call the Premier.
Thank
you very much, Mr Speaker. And as the Leader of the Opposition would know, that public servants provide advice to ministers, and ministers make their decisions. The Leader of the Opposition would also know that there are lobbyists on all different sides of politics, and they must adhere to a lobbyist code of conduct, Mr Speaker, and they actually have to register their details, Mr Speaker. Secondly,
Member for McConnell, Leader of the Opposition, you've asked your question. I'd like to hear the answer.
Thank you. Secondly, Mr Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition would well know that as part of the Newbury review, there was a strategic review where he looked at a number of issues pertaining to the Office of the Integrity Commissioner as well as lobbying activities, Mr Speaker. The Leader of the Opposition would also know that this strategic review is now being considered by the Economics and Governance Committee, and there are a range of recommendations contained in that review which relate to lobbyists. I look forward to the Economics and Governance Committee making their recommendations to Parliament, consideration of that report, and then, Mr Speaker, the government will respond to that, as is the normal parliamentary business, that members are well aware of the procedures of this House.
Mr Speaker.
I call the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr Speaker, further question to the Premier. The Opposition can reveal that last week, in the middle of an integrity crisis triggered by concerns over Labor lobbyists, an actor donated $35,000 to the Labor Party. As several clients have either recently received favourable outcomes or have had major decisions pending, what steps will the Premier take to ensure the money is returned to remove any perception of bribery, unfair access and influence on decision-makers?
Order! Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. And as the member very well knows, that any donations that are made to either the Liberal National Party or the Australian Labor Party have to be declared, Mr Speaker. Right. They have to be declared. That's the law. That's actually the law. That's
Leader of the Opposition.
The law of Queensland, Mr Speaker. But we know...
Pause the clock. Pause the clock. Leader of the Opposition, you are not directing your comments through the chair. I ask you to cease interjecting. Premier, you have the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And the member should be well aware that under my government we actually lowered the disclosure limits of political donations in this state, Mr Speaker, from around 12,000 to 1,000.
Order!
1,000, Mr Speaker. And, Mr Speaker, what the LNP always wants to do is keep donations hidden, Mr Speaker. They didn't like the developer donations, Mr Speaker. And, Mr Speaker...
Member for Mermaid Beach.
Mr Speaker, and they fought this all the way to the High Court.
Member for Kawana has warned understanding orders.
Donations in this state is zero, Mr Speaker, is absolutely zero. Mr Speaker, we also implemented real-time disclosure. Real-time disclosure so the public knows exactly who is donating and where they are donating to, Mr Speaker. That's right. Mr Speaker, those opposite voted against these law reforms. That is
Order. Members on both sides of the House, there is far too much interjections. I would like to hear the Premier's answer. Premier, you have the call.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And we all know how well the LNP kept their lobbyist registers when they were in countless estimates hearings, Mr Speaker, countless estimates hearings of how the opposition, members of the opposition, failed to keep accurate lobbyist registers, Mr Speaker. Now, Mr Speaker, it is absolutely
Leader of the Opposition ceases interjections.
When lobbyists meet with ministers or ministerial staff, Mr Speaker.
Member for Buderim has warned understanding orders.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And let me conclude by what I said in my previous answer, that there is currently recommendations with the Economics and Governance Committee, and I look forward to receiving that report in the House of the outcomes of what the Economics and Governance Committee, which is a bipartisan committee of this parliament, Mr Speaker.
Order.
Well, we don't sack committees like those opposite, Mr Speaker. We don't trash the committee process like those opposite, Mr Speaker.
Order.
Respect the institutions of this parliament, Mr Speaker. We don't throw the opposition out, Mr Speaker, like we were thrown out when we were in opposition.
Premier's time has expired.
Mr Speaker.
I call the member for Mackay.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is of the Premier and the Minister for the Olympics. Will the Premier update the House on how the Palaszczuk government's commitment to growing the aquaculture industry is not only producing more seafood but more jobs for regions like Mackay and North Queensland?
I call the Premier.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Mackay for that important question, Mr Speaker, because on this side of the House we back aquaculture in Queensland, Mr Speaker. And what we're seeing is growth in the industry like we've never seen before, Mr Speaker. And in fact, and I thank the member for Mackay too, because her region is actually absolutely skyrocketing ahead, Mr Speaker, when it comes to growth in aquaculture. I can actually confirm today that in relation to aquaculture, the Mackay region contributes around $73 million to the state of aquaculture, Mr Speaker, and in Cairns it's around $54 million, Mr Speaker, and in Townsville over $28 million. And what we've seen is a growth in this industry from 2014-15, when it was worth around $120 million in Queensland. Today it is worth $194 million, Mr Speaker. That has been an increase of 17.4%, Mr Speaker. And what's the growth in? The growth is in prawns and barramundi, Mr Speaker. Huge increases in prawns and barramundi. So we know that the production has increased that amount of money, and in relation to the prawns and barramundi, we've got prawn productions increased by 28% to more than 8,000 tonnes, and barramundi by 20% to nearly 3,500 tonnes, Mr Speaker. There's also been a 9.5%. Now, those opposite won't like this because we're talking about jobs. There has been a 9.5% increase in full-time equivalent jobs in that sector, now employing 800 people, Mr Speaker. Now, because my government recognised that this was going to be a growth area, Mr Speaker, we want to make sure that we have the skills and training for young people wanting to enter into this industry, Mr Speaker, and that's why we're building aquaculture training facilities in Bowen, in Rockhampton and in Cannavale, Mr Speaker.
Good to see the money be going into the regional areas and the economy holding tight there. Well, we will return to the Parliament House if we need to, but at right this point in time, we'll move on and go to different Parliament House, and we'll look at this report where Kausalya Vaghela says bullying left her nervous every week.
I was a very strong person. I was an independent woman, a very strong person before I became an MP. Within a year, I was completely destroyed. I was a nervous wreck, always looking over my shoulder. I had not signed up for the abuse that I had to face over the last 3 years. I had no idea what was lying ahead. Had I known, I would have never become a member of Parliament.
So as they reckon, it takes a special kind to be there, but there is no excuse for bullying and of course, racism, as we know. So that is a report from there. Right now, we'll look at the public schools and private schools and where the enrollments are happening.
The new face of private schools is in the suburbs, not the inner city, and Islamic schools are growing fastest. This school started with 19 students a decade ago, Today it's home to more than 600.
I wanted her to be around people who are brought up in the same way.
Nashwa Mohammed's 3 kids are among the 6,400 students who left the public system last year. She didn't have complaints, but with her daughter Lujane starting high school, she wanted religion and values at the forefront. She moved her 2 younger children at the same time.
I wasn't really sure, but I thought as a parent it would be easier for me to drop everyone off in the morning at the same spot and pick them up at the end of the day.
Principal Mona Abdul Fattah says the school can't build facilities quickly enough for new applicants.
It's almost 100 a year, and at the moment there are classes where we cannot accept any more students.
Principal Abdul Fattah is even training new teachers to keep pace as more young families move in.
A big attraction in our school is the Islamic environment, it's the identity, it's the care, the compassion.
The enrolment shift is celebrated here, but it'll have a financial sting for some classrooms. Schools are funded according to enrolment numbers, so the public sector could lose more than $94 million nationally, while private schools will be $350 million richer. The change in the way Australians educate their kids is partly attributed to our closed borders. 2021 was the first year since 1946 that more Australians left than arrived. Whatever the reasons, almost 1.4 million young Australians are now private school students. Connor Duffy, ABC News.
And so there you are, up to date. Well, right now, let's take up the message from our sponsors for this segment before we go to Daily India Report.
GlobeNet Realty. GlobeNet Realty has been the longest established, trusted and respected agency in its trade area. Washa Chandra, Director of GlobeNet Realty, provides honest and ethical service to her customers. If you are thinking of investing in Brisbane real estate market, or if you are seeking professional property management, then you should contact Usha Chandra today on landline 3865 4466 or mobile 0419 775 416. And for further updates, log on to our website www.globenetralty.com.au. GlobeNet Realty is your own local real estate agency. Situated at Shop 52281 Sandgate Road, Boondall. GlobeNet Realty. Real estate is our world.
And real estate is the world. And don't forget that every Wednesday we have the weekly real estate update with Usha Chandra. Well, ladies and gentlemen, right now it's time to go to our Daily India Report.
Welcome to the Daily India Report that brings you glimpses of the changing India. In our first story, as the Ukraine-Russia crisis deepens, the US and its allies have issued sanctions against Russia. Meanwhile, the first repatriation flight from Ukraine with 241 passengers landed in India around midnight of 22nd February 2022. US President Joe Biden on February 22nd announced that Moscow will be cut off from Western financing and has imposed unspecified sanctions on Russia in response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Speaking at the White House, President Biden said that there would be more sanctions if Russia moved further into Ukraine, as he expected it would. Biden said Russia's actions were in violation of international law and therefore the firm response from the US and its allies. He also accused Putin of historic revisionism for questioning the very existence of Ukraine. Biden said, quote, "There is no question Russia is the aggressor," end quote. The US has directed a marginal movement of US troops already in Europe into the 3 Baltic republics adjoining Russia, while asserting that the US did not want to go to war with Russia but would defend every inch of the NATO territory. Biden said that the US would also provide defensive equipment to Ukraine. However, Biden continued to hold out hope for talks with Russia if it is serious, saying, quote, "There is still time to avert a worst-case scenario. We are open to diplomacy if it is serious," end quote. Russia has said the US and its allies have not responded seriously to its security concerns. Meanwhile, an Air India plane AI-1946 carrying 241 passengers from Ukraine landed in Delhi late at night on 22nd February. The Boeing 787 aircraft left Ukraine's capital, Kyiv, at 6 p.m. and reached Delhi around midnight. Those on board were mostly students who were returning after the embassy advisories. In its advisory, the Indian embassy said, in view of the continued high levels of tensions and uncertainties with respect to the situation in Ukraine, all Indian nationals whose stay is not deemed essential and all Indian students are advised to leave Ukraine temporarily. India flagged off its first consignment of humanitarian aid of 50,000 tons of wheat to Afghanistan on February 22nd through the Atari-Wagah border in Punjab. The consignment will go from Atari ICP, Jalalabad via Pakistan to Afghanistan. Indian Foreign Secretary Harshvardhan Shringla on February 22nd flagged off the humanitarian assistance of 50,000 tons of wheat for Afghanistan at the Atari-Wagah border in Punjab. The Foreign Secretary informed that the consignment will go from Atari ICP, Jalalabad via Pakistan. Shringla said that India will send many such consignments as humanitarian assistance to Afghanistan in the next 2 to 3 months. He said 50 trucks carrying wheat from India will go to Afghanistan as the country faced a humanitarian crisis. Despite the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan, India decided to extend assistance due to historic ties with the people of Afghanistan. Afghan ambassador to India, Farid Mamundzeh, said his country was grateful to the government of India that they stood by Afghanistan during difficult times. 50,000 metric tons of wheat will be delivered in a month to the country and will be distributed to Afghan people facing food scarcity. It was the first consignment consisting of 2,500 tons of wheat in 50 Afghan trucks, which will be sent to the World Food Programme for dissemination in Afghanistan in the next 2 to 3 months. Amid declining cases of COVID-19 in India, especially the poll-bound states, the Election Commission of India has relaxed curbs on road shows and poll rallies for campaigning by political parties. The Election Commission of India on February 22nd has further eased COVID-induced restrictions imposed on campaigning in the ongoing assembly polls. The Commission has allowed road shows with the prior permission of district authorities. It also allowed political parties and candidates to hold meetings and rallies. During January and February, due to high number of COVID cases, the Commission had earlier banned physical rallies, road shows and padyatras when it announced the poll schedule for Uttar Pradesh, Uttarakhand, Goa, Punjab and Manipur. The poll panel said it takes a periodic review of the status of the COVID situation in the country and especially in the poll-bound states. Campaigning is on for the two-phase Manipur Assembly elections and phases 5, 6 and 7 of the Uttar Pradesh polls. Elections have concluded in Goa, Punjab and Uttarakhand. The counting of votes polled in all 5 states will take place on March 10th. According to the Union Health Secretary, COVID cases have declined significantly to just 13,405 as of February 21, 2022 and have come to a minimal level in the country. In the states of Uttar Pradesh and Manipur, where polling is still to be held, the total number of cases, which were more than 16.7 thousand at peak on 22nd January 2022, have come down to just about 500 cases on 22nd February 2022. Considering the fact that the number of COVID cases has become very small in the poll-bound states, the Commission has further relaxed the restrictions on campaigning with immediate effect, the statement said. In good news for Indian flyers, the Dubai airport has scrapped the pre-flight COVID-19 test requirement for travel to Dubai from India. Travellers from India to Dubai will no longer need to undergo a COVID RT-PCR test at the departure airports. Until recently, the passengers were supposed to take the test at the departure airports within 6 hours of the flight. The new guidelines issued by the Dubai airport have removed this requirement for travellers from 4 countries including India, Pakistan, Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. According to the circular effective February 22nd, passengers from these nations need a negative result of an RT-PCR test taken within 48 hours of travel. They also need to undergo a PCR test on arrival in Dubai. Passengers are required to self-quarantine till they get their results. However, the circular does not mention the RT-PCR test requirement. Meanwhile, India recorded 13,405 new COVID-19 cases and 235 deaths in the last 24 hours. The country's active cases currently stand at 181,075 and the total number of recoveries in the last 24 hours is 34,226. Gold prices rose to a 9-month high in India as the US issued sanctions on Russia and its allies. Gold prices in India rose to a 9-month high on 22nd February 2022 as demand for safe haven investments went up after Russia ordered troops into breakaway regions of eastern Ukraine. Spot gold gained 0.2% to $1,909.54 per ounce. US gold futures gained 0.7% to $1,913.6. Indian equity indices BSE Sensex plummeted 973 points to 56,710, while the NSE Nifty fell 271 points to 16,935. The two indices were nearly 2% lower, extending their losses to the fifth session in a row. Other Asian bourses followed the overnight Wall Street tumble and heavy sell-offs in European markets as investors grew worried with the signs of escalation between Russia and the West. Russian President Vladimir Putin on February 21st recognized two breakaway regions in eastern Ukraine as independent and ordered its army to launch what Moscow called a peacekeeping operation into the area, accelerating a crisis the West fears could unleash a major war. Oil prices too jumped to a 7-year high, while US stock futures fell. The unspecified sanctions issued by the US President Joe Biden have further created doubts in the minds of the investors as they lost a whopping $80.34 billion in morning trade itself on February 22. US benchmark 10-year yields tumbled on the back of the Ukraine crisis and US Federal Reserve rate hike bets, moving away from a more than 2-year peak hit last week. To attract more Indian tourists, Tourism Australia has decided to incentivize Indian travellers to visit Australia. As Australia opened its borders to vaccinated international travellers on 21st February 2022, Tourism Australia said it is delighted to welcome back travellers from India. To attract more tourists, it announced a visa application charge waiver as an incentive for tourists whose visa to Australia has either expired or is expiring between 20th March 2020 and 30th June 2022. Qantas and Air India have recently resumed direct flights to and from India, which will also boost travel between the two countries. Tourism Australia also stated that their recent consumer demand project research suggests that 1.8 million out of 2.2 million high-value travellers from India intend to visit Australia over the next 2 years. It is also expected that there will be a huge demand for travel to Australia ahead of the ICC World T20 tournament to be held in October and November this year. A Telugu film is taking India and the world by storm. The film of Pawan Kalyan, Bhimla Nayak, has crossed $300,000 in pre-sales in 92 locations. The film will release in theatres worldwide on February 25th. After Vakil Saab, Pawan Kalyan is expected to continue his longest unbroken winning streak with the much-awaited Telugu language action-packed entertainer Bhimla Nayak. In premiere pre-sales in the USA, Bhimla Nayak has crossed the $400,000 mark already from more than 100 locations. Pawan may break his own records with the mega release. Going by the pre-release buzz, the Sagar K. Chandra directorial is expected to witness excellent openings also in India. Fans are delighted and have been anticipating watching the movie in theatres ever since the makers announced the release date of the film. The Telugu remake of the 2020 Malayalam release, Ayappanum Koshiyum, has crossed Rs 102 crores approximately for its theatrical rights globally. Bhimla Nayak is all set to release in theatres worldwide on February 25th, 2022. That's all for this bulletin of Daily India Report.
And Again, thank you very much for that report, Himanshu. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's about all we have for you today at this point in time. But before we leave, we will cross over to the Parliament one more time.
Can I thank the member for Bonnie for his question. The process for the Planning Minister to call in a planning application or approval, generally the proponent will write and ask for that to be considered. The Minister would then receive advice from the department. They would then issue a notice advising of an intention to call in. Then there is a process for public submissions. Then the department provides advice about whether the matter should be called in, and at that point, the Minister makes a decision. I'd emphasise that that doesn't mean the decision is made to approve the project. It just means that a decision has been made that there is a state interest that should be considered. For the benefit of the opposition and benefit of the House, can I please table the original request from Wanless to call in the application, the meeting brief from the department for the only meeting that I had with external stakeholders regarding the application to call in, the decision brief including the preliminary assessment report for the notice of proposal to call in, the decision brief and assessment report for my decision to call it in, internal emails within my office discussing the reasons for calling it in. That's now all on the record, Mr. Speaker. Now, can I also advise that given the member for Bonnie pretends to be the one person over there that cares about the environment and recycling, I've today written to Wanless and asked them to provide him with a briefing about their project so that he can properly understand the economics of what they are proposing and make a better informed decision about that. Mr. Speaker, I also note yesterday discussion about documents that make their way to my VIP correspondence folder, and can I also note that a lot of documents make their way to my VIP correspondence, including everything the member for Maroochydore sends me, everything the member for Scenic Rim sends me. I say to the member for Bonnie, you might not be important over there, but you still make it to my important person folder, Mr. Speaker. And now finally can I say that the main opponent of this project that the LNP is doing the bidding for is a major donor to the LNP. In fact, they donated $77,000 to the LNP last year. The member for Bonnie is simply doing their bidding, and if they want to keep doing that, then they should return that money, which I note is more than twice what they have accused us of receiving from an actor. Mr.
Order. Member for Mudgeeraba.
Crash and burn.
Order.
Mr. Speaker.
We call the member for Cairns.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Health and Ambulance Services. Can the Minister please update the House on recent mental health investments for Queenslanders and any alternative approaches?
We call the Minister for Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for Cairns for his question. I know not just how passionate he is about investment in mental health, but what a strong advocate he is for his community, and that he is absolutely delivering for his community as part of the Palaszczuk government. Mr. Speaker, mental health issues sadly affect 1 in 4 people throughout our state. Each year, Queensland's public mental health system provides care to more than 110,000 people. The Palaszczuk government continues to invest in better mental health services for Queenslanders, and we spend $1.8 billion each year. It is this government that has opened the $27 million Jacaranda Place Adolescent Mental Health Centre. We know it was to replace the Barrett Centre that was very cruelly closed by those opposite. We've increased the mental health workforce to above the per capita national average. We've delivered $74.5 million mental health and wellbeing package as part of the Queensland COVID-19 economic recovery plan, and we are now building a new mental health and alcohol and drug facilities, rehabilitation facilities around the state. Earlier this month, the member for Cairns and I turned the sod on the $70 million 53-bed Cairns mental health unit. It's a new purpose-built facility providing a modern and therapeutic environment to help the recovery of mental health patients for the far north. There is not a one-size-fits-all approach to the treatment of mental health. It is a complex issue. That's why I announced a new $8 million pilot program, QMOST, which is Moderated Online Social Therapy, and I was very pleased to do that with Professor Pat McGorry. This is a great initiative to support youth mental health. Queensland Health will partner with Children's Hospital Foundation and Origin to pilot that tailored digital on-demand mental health service. Of course, we continue to do more in our co-responder model, and of course we have a parliamentary committee operating right now. Of course, I'd like to see the Commonwealth step up more in this space with supporting around eating disorders and QMOST. They're not putting a cent into these dedicated programs this year. But also, I should say, when we talk about the Commonwealth, they recognise the importance of working with the private sector and actually have contracted Aspen Medical to be the aged care response with the outbreak of COVID in our facilities in Queensland, and I welcome the work that is being done there by the Commonwealth as well. But Mr. Speaker, when it comes to compliance, the then Attorney General Gerald Blay had passionately defended his decision to ignore advice from his department and award a government boot camp contract to a company which later became an LNP donor. I still remember those days.
Mr. Speaker.
I call the member for Corumba.
So, ladies and gentlemen, that's about all for today. It's been wonderful having your company. We'll catch up with all of you tomorrow for the Friday edition and moving on into the weekend edition on Saturday. Well, right now it is quite pleasant out there in Brisbane, and it is 26 degrees and partly cloudy and not too warm. So, 26 degrees is better than what it had been before, around the 30s. Well, right now it's time to say goodbye. Until tomorrow, we'll see you then.